Hi everyone, for those of you who may not know who I am, my name is Manveena and I'm a recent graduate from Trinity University from May of 2020. Before you continue watching this video, I would like to highly encourage you to watch the previous two videos posted on this channel. The first details Kezia's experience while being a Black woman at this school, and the second is about anti-Blackness and suppression within this institution. The content of my video will cover my experiences while I've been at Trinity over the past 4 years. I will do my best and try to amplify and uplift my Black peers' voices and stories. I also wanted to share and detail key moments that I believe led to racial heightened tensions on this campus. And I also wanted to work through some inner mechanisms within student organizations and student involvement that I have personally seen because I've had to work through them myself and interacted with them. So as I continue, I have a few disclaimers. The first being that I am in no way trying to align my experience with the Black experience at Trinity University. I'm here to uplift and amplify my Black peers and friends' stories and voices. I'm not here to discount their experiences because they are all valid. I believe them to be true. And I'm also here to help add to the narrative. I think that Kezia's video has been very public. It has gotten a lot of traction. And I think from what I've seen, people are trying to dismiss it as one student's story and one student's perspective. And I'm here to tell you that that's not true. She's not just one disgruntled student out of a couple. She's one disgruntled student out of many. Her story is unique, I think, because it pertains to her, but I think the way in which marginalized communities are harmed at Trinity is not just for a few, has not happened to a few of us. And so it's really important to share these stories, and that's why I'm helping to add to this narrative. And I'm not saying that my story completes this narrative. It absolutely does not. It will just give you, I think, a sneak peek into at least like the facets of student life that I was involved in. So the second disclaimer I have is that I'm not perfect. I am still growing, I'm educating myself, and I'm unlearning. I'm not trying to place myself in an authority position on these topics. And I want to remind you all to be kind, not just to me, but to other students who are speaking out and sharing their stories. This is hard for us. It's hard for us to look back and dig up these experiences and this trauma for us to just to help educate you. So again, please be kind and please think before you post anything trying to dismiss what we're talking about. The third is that I have nothing to gain from this video. I obviously thought long and hard about how this could possibly affect me in the future, how it could impact me professionally. I was worried that maybe it would burn bridges with folks at Trinity that I have spent the past 4 years working with. And to that, I want to say, I really hope that that is not what happens and what the outcome is of this video. I hope that if you recognize that, I hope that you are able to recognize if you have caused harm to Black students or Black colleagues or other students from marginalized communities, and I hope that you are able to take accountability for your actions. It's hard to do that work. It's hard to sit in the discomfort and the guilt of that, but it's also very important. And I think that guilt is what has driven me to make this video. Before I get into the contents of this video, I also want to give a little background on myself. I am an out-of-state student. I hold multiple marginalized identities. I have always been the only Sikh student on campus, one of two or one of three. And Sikh is as a S-I-K-H. And for me, that was always very isolating and alienating, especially when I first started out at Trinity, to kind of not really have that support and that community on campus. And I was kind of forced to go off campus to find that community for myself. And I'll discuss this a little more later as I continue. So to go over the student leadership positions I held, I had a bunch of different hats. I wore a bunch of different hats while I was on this campus, but the main ones I will focus on for this video are the hats that I wore in the diversity and inclusion work that I did. I served as the vice president of the Trinity Diversity Connection for a year and a half. And then after Kezia transferred out, I served as the president for the following 6 months. And while I was a vice president, I also served as the student advisory board co-chair. And I'll go into what these organizations are and what they do as we continue. After I was done being president, I quit all of my leadership positions and organizations I was involved in, and I kind of fell off the face of the earth. I had nothing left in me to give to this university. I was drained, and I needed to take care of myself and focus on my mental health. And that's not just a story that is coming from me. That narrative of constantly being drained, of being overworked, of being called on too many times and being stretched too thin is a narrative that is very common amongst student leaders. And when I say student leaders for this video, I'm really focusing on student leaders from marginalized communities who are doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I'm not saying that that's not to discount other student leaders on campus who may feel the same way. I'm just saying that this is the context for my video, and I'm speaking from what I know. And anyways, I fell off the face of the earth, took my time to, collect myself. But before I graduated, I was also awarded with the Presidential Award of Excellence from the Division of Student Life. And while I don't think it's necessary for you to know my position titles and the awards I received while I was at Trinity, I do think it helps to give you context of the point of view that I have in my positioning within the university. For me to have received that award, I think I was proud of it because a part of me felt like, okay, well, the work that I've done has been noticed. But something that I felt with that award was also guilt. I was like, there are so many students on this campus who do so much work, tiring work, and they are never acknowledged. They are not properly supported. We're not given the resources that we need. And when I was thinking this, there were multiple names that kept coming up, and they were Black students who were doing this work. And their recognition obviously isn't what they're asking for right now. What they're asking for is for us to break down the systems of oppression that harm students, and for us to create a community that stops causing harm, supports students, gives them the resources that they need, and forces Trinity to stop leaning on Black and brown bodies to do diversity and inclusion work. And if you do lean on us, compensate us for our work. So there's a lot to that, and there's a lot you could break down further into, but I'm gonna keep going. This leads me into kind of like that guilt that I talked about of why I wanted to make this video. And that's because over the past few weeks, while I've been doing some reflecting, and I think since Kezia's left, I've been doing this reflecting and seeing how I was treated when I was president versus how she was, is that when Kezia and I worked as a team, we always tried to make sure that we had the same messaging and that we were on the same page about what we were trying to accomplish. Kezia, and this was told to my face, and these are things that I also heard in passing from people, Kezia was always painted as being too aggressive, too angry, too loud, too radical. I would turn around and say the exact same things in these meetings. And I was always told, thank you for coming to this meeting. Thank you for sharing your opinion. Thank you for, speaking up. We're listening and we'll really think about what you said. And I think that stark contrast in the way that we are treated goes to show what the experience of being a Black woman is like at Trinity University. You're always deemed as being too angry, and because of that, you are dismissed. And to me, that's wrong. That needs to change. And we just need to step away from that narrative that Black women are too angry, too loud, too Black. And so that was the first thing that I think I realized that I wanted to talk about, because to me, it wasn't fair. Kezia was someone who always led with compassion and conviction, and for her to be treated like that, to me, is heartbreaking. So I'm going to move on to the next thing that I wanted to discuss, which is, I think, key moments that I believe led to heightened racial tensions on this campus. I don't know if people will agree with me, but from my perspective on like the view that I had, these two things that I'm going to talk about were the two things that stood out to me the most. The first being the catalyst to me, which was when Stacey Davidson was fired. I personally did not have a relationship with Stacey Davidson, but I knew what her impact had been on other students on this campus. I knew what kind of support system she provided for them. I knew how much love students had for her and how she had positively helped change students' lives and, given them that comfort that I think a lot of students don't feel at Trinity, especially if you're from a marginalized community. And so when Stacey Davidson was fired, there was this collective anger. There was so much tension, and it was just so piercing and palpable. Like, you could cut through it with a knife. There was so much anxiety, and students were demanding answers. They wanted to know what happened. And this is a side note, but if you were on campus at this time and didn't feel this energy, if you didn't feel that collective pain and hurt from these students, you were not paying attention and you were part of the problem. We constantly feel like we're screaming into the abyss, but we are never quiet. We're never passive. We are always speaking up. And so for students to pretend like they didn't know about what was happening, you just were not paying attention. But anyways, as I said, that collective pain and hurt was so tangible. You could feel it. And there was nothing done from the administration or from people in authority positions to help relieve that tension. If anything, following Stacey Davidson's firing, there were so many other things that were like a drop in the bucket that happened that I think caused anxiety to rise. And the way that I felt on campus at this time was you just didn't know what was going to happen next. You didn't know what the school was going to do next to upset us. And I remember non-Black students saying oh my God, why can't people just get over the Stacey thing? To that, I don't even know what to say. The second thing that happened that I believe led to heightened racial tensions was the meeting of issues of race in Trinity's 150th. So if you look in the description box below, you will find a Medium article link that will take you to statements written by students who were present during this meeting. The last statement in the article is from me, and it kind of details the aftermath of what happened, because as a disclaimer, I was not present at this meeting. And to give you guys a little broad overview, but you can go ahead and read those statements as they pretty much detail everything. Less than 24 hours before this meeting took place, cultural organizations, student leaders were invited, and I believe Greek life organization leaders were invited. They were told that they're not allowed to bring anyone except themselves, and if they can't come, they can only send one other person. I realized, and I had heard about this meeting through other student leaders and in my circles, and in my head I was like, wait a second. And I tried to reach out to student leaders, and I was like, hey, did you get an invite to this meeting? And I was talking to the TU Latino Association president, and she said, no, I haven't heard about it. And I was like, this leader represents such a huge population on campus, and you're gonna tell me that you left them off the list to talk about race issues? To me, that's unacceptable. Anyways, this organization leader got invited. This meeting took place, and President Danny Anderson did the intro and then basically brought up blackface as a part of Trinity's racist history. but I think danced around the word racist and called blackface like a silly mistake, from what I believe. That's in the statements. And the student leader said, you know, why don't you call it what it is? It's racism. And basically just didn't really want to take that accountability of saying the word racism, I guess. And he left this meeting because he had a more pressing meeting to attend, and whatever discussion led after was not facilitated properly. Student leaders from these cultural organizations left this meeting feeling disappointed, disheartened. They felt like the work that they do doesn't matter, because the things that were said in this meeting were just, I think, discouraging. From what I understood, people pointed out that the diversity and organization leaders needed to do more work in advertising their events. I'm going to talk about budget stuff later, but I just want to say that is a lie. When we put on events, we heavily market. We put out these events not only to the Trinity community, we put them out sometimes to the San Antonio community. We spend so much money on our printing materials. We make social media posts. We do email blasts. We make it a point to invite administrators. We go out of our way to make sure that we have as much of a wide breadth of reaching the most amount of people when we market our events. So for Greek life organization leaders to say that to cultural organization leaders, I mean, I think caused a little bit of a rift, and there was definitely some damage control that had to be done. And something that we did to combat that and to kind of start a conversation was that Kezia and I, being the VP and president of TDC at the time, decided to meet with the co-chairs, I believe they're called, or presidents of the Greek Council. And so we had weekly meetings to discuss, you know, how we could possibly collaborate, how we could get onto the same page. And so there was, of course, that effort made by the two sides. But anyways, going back to this meeting, once the contents of the meeting were shared publicly amongst students, people were really upset. And so upset that Ali Roman, the director of diversity and inclusion, held kind of like an emergency meeting / conversation that same evening. The meeting was heavily attended. So many people came. I think people were sitting on the floor. It was attended by Black students, non-Black students of color, and students from the LGBTQIA+ community, from what I remember. And this meeting, the energy in that room, I can't even explain it to you. It was, on one hand, heartbreaking, because I think this was the first time that so many students from so many different backgrounds had a safe space to actually vocalize their trauma and the harm that they've been caused. This meeting was not only to discuss how angry we were about the meeting that took place earlier that morning, but it was to discuss that collective anger that we felt from all of the other things that have happened on this campus that have led up to this. And it was the first time we were heard, we were listened to, we weren't told that we were complaining, we weren't being dismissed, we weren't being told that we were ungrateful. And I think many times that is the response from other people when students from marginalized backgrounds speak up. And so, on one hand, yes, this meeting was heartbreaking. On the other, part of it was kind of inspiring, because you saw that all of these different students had these different experiences of being caused harm, but you realize it was the root of the problem is the same. And so I think this meeting helped to band us together. And at some point during this meeting, we had to ask Ali Roman to step out, because it became a norm on Trinity's campus to have to protect Black staff or faculty. You never wanted them to know too much about what we might be doing or organizing, because you didn't want it to affect their jobs, their security. And it was a running joke amongst students that Dr. Sheryl Tynes, the Vice President of Student Life, had bugged and wired the Diversity and Inclusion Office. For that to be what students on this campus think of your Vice President of Student Life is sad. And I think that there should be some reflecting done as to why that is. People don't just come up with these stories. These jokes, they're based on true stories. And that I just wanted to make that point. But I think what this meeting also showed us again, and we all know this, is that Trinity only cares about their appearance. They care about their optics, and they will do whatever they have to do to protect that. And at the end of the Blackface and Race Issues meeting that took place that morning, students were told, do not talk to the press. Trinity University will handle all official communication. So it was just like messy, and like it was just the second thing I think that happened that year that did not help to relieve pressure, and if anything added fuel to the fire. And for this school to tell students that they care about our well-being, that they care about our mental health, is a lie. So many things happened this year where Trinity could have stepped in and said, okay, let's relieve this pressure, this tension, the stress that it's causing to students. And not once did that happen. So for Trinity to say that they care about their students' well-being is not true. And I did not see that. So that I think sums up what I had to say about heightened racial tensions. Of course, students might have other stories, and if you do, please speak up. Let's share them. But the next thing I wanted to talk about was, let's talk about the TDC budget and the DIO operational budget. So if you do not know what Trinity Diversity Connection is, TDC is a university-sponsored organization. What does this mean? There are 6 university-sponsored organizations specifically recognized by the university to advance goals aligned with the university's mission and values. Trinity Diversity Connection promotes, educates, and advocates for diversity and serves as a resource to cultural, religious, and underrepresented groups on campus. I think our TDC mission in the past couple of years has grown to say that we promote, educate, and advocate for diversity, inclusion, equity, and social justice. I could be wrong. But I have a lot of thoughts on TDC being a USO. So for those of you who might not know, TDC's annual budget is about $32,000. I'm going to repeat this. $32,000 is a large chunk of money. This money comes from the student activity fee. And every year we are required to submit our budget, and part of our budget are allocated to different sections. And so I think there's another conversation that needs to take place around the power structure that SGA has and the ways in which they are allowed to allocate funds. This is a side note, but the fact that BSU, the Black Student Union, has to ask for money the same way as like a Dungeons and Dragons club would ask for money, to me blows my mind. That to me is not, that needs to change. So that's a side note. And as much as like I want to talk about it, I don't know enough about the inner workings of the student government to discuss how funds are allocated. I just know in terms of how TDC is given their money and how like other small like organizations or clubs ask for funding. So the Diversity and Inclusion Office budget is $15,000. That's less than half of what TDC's budget is, and we're just an organization. The DIO is like a full office department. And I understand that historically Trinity always like underfunds new departments on campus, but for you to say that you care about diversity and inclusion and to underfund that department, to me doesn't make sense. And so we realized very quickly that the DIO was underfunded. They didn't have enough resources. That Ali Roman, the director of the Diversity and Inclusion Office, did not have a support staff. She only had students, and there's only so much students can do. They're also full-time students. So we went to, or Kezia on behalf of TDC went to someone, I think the director of student involvement from what I believe, to ask if we could restructure our budget to have a section that allocated certain money towards collaborating with the DIO. We were told, no, you cannot restructure your budget. So this led us to funding DIO programming under the table. And I think as a student, when you hear that, or even as an alumni or a parent, like, you should be upset about that. A university organization, a student organization has to fund official diversity and inclusion office programming or help fund. And the way that we ended up doing it wasn't really like under the table. We would just like slap the TDC logo onto like a flyer and be like, oh yes, TDC collaborated, but we only really did it because we had the funds to help make these programs happen, or these events happen. So if that doesn't bother you, there's a problem. And it's just something that needs to be talked about. And I also want to shine a light on the fact that Ellie Roman was brought into this position, given this office, and given $15,000. She's basically given twigs and told to build a palace. I made up that metaphor. And I just want to say that even though she wasn't able to build a palace because it was impossible, she built hell of a foundation. She did so much with so little that it was impressive. And for Trinity to not have been able to retain her is Trinity's loss. And if you don't agree with me, that's your problem. But I want to go back to TDC and our funding. So the student activity fee comes from Trinity University students' tuition. We, every semester, have multiple events that we spend hundreds of dollars on individually. And we spend money on printing materials, we spend money on marketing these events, bringing in speakers, getting food, and we will show up to these events and not a single person from the community will be there outside of our TDC board. So for you to always complain that you don't understand how the student activity fee works, it doesn't make sense because you're not taking advantage of the programming that we're creating. And it's also heartbreaking to us to have to plan these events and to show up, to be so excited to do something for our community and for no one to be there and support. Over the past couple years, I've always been asked, how can we support TDC? And I always have told people, show up. Every time you come, bring a new person with you. Yet again, we still have events where no one shows up. And to me, that is so disappointing. And that is going to lead to something I'm going to talk about later, where I have a call to the student body to step away from performative allyship, step towards being productive allies. And if you don't know what that means, do your homework, educate yourself, and learn what it means. There's something else that I want to discuss regarding TDC. We had one specific semester where members from Tigers from Liberty would show up to every single event we hosted, bringing multiple members. And if you don't know what Tigers for Liberty is, I think they're just like a more right-leaning conservative group. Don't really know much past that. But of course, like, we support students being able to voice their opinions and their beliefs, and we appreciate engagement from students who hold various beliefs. However, for you to constantly show up to our events every week or every other week and derail our discussions and our workshops, for you to disrupt the actual conversation that's taking place, is disrespectful. And I also want to shine a light on how the university almost supports that. You let students bring Dinesh D'Souza to this campus, but you won't let BSU have Stacey Davidson at the Kente ceremony? That's unacceptable. Anyways, in one specific instance, we held a workshop and brought in a lawyer who worked with Farises, and she was doing a workshop and presentation on like debusting myths surrounding immigration. I think one of the students who came from TFL wore a Trump shirt and just sat in the middle of the workshop, didn't say a single thing the whole workshop, but his demeanor was made so many students uncomfortable. And it's not just because of the shirt he was wearing. It was just this very aggressive way of showing up. And then the other people from TFL who were there had to be called out by the person we brought in from the community to do this workshop. She took time away from the presentation to point out how they were disrupting and how they were being disrespectful. To us, that was so embarrassing. We had to apologize to this person after this event. So I want to share this because we are calling for, Trinity to, at the top, reevaluate the ways in which, from the top, they uphold systems of oppression. But I also want to emphasize how our peers and how Trinity students are complicit and how they are also part of this system and they're part of the problem. So something else that I want to point out in terms of TDC is that I was a part of this organization for a little over 2 years. Not once while I was a part of that organization did anyone from the administration ask to meet with us or host us in their homes. I knew that they were hosting other organizations, but why not TDC? Why was TDC not given any legitimacy? And it just blows my mind because people don't know that when cultural organizations try to host events, TDC funds most, if not all of them, like a portion of their events. And if we're not funding them, we're helping them plan them, we're helping them market their events. And previously, before Kezia and I became president, and a couple years prior to that, TDC used to house all of the cultural organizations. And we don't know what changed for that to not be the case anymore. But I want to go back to that question of why is TDC not treated with any legitimacy? Why is there also no accountability or no, part done? Why is there no need on the part of the administration to want to talk to us, to see what we're up to? We started doing open house or office hours for cultural organization leaders that needed help navigating the way in which you plan your events, the way you ask for funding from SGA. That work shouldn't have to be on us to do. But we were still doing it. We were not being compensated for that time either. So those are some things to think about in terms of TDC. Another thing that I wanted to discuss is that these concerns about the Diversity and Inclusion Office have been brought up with the administration. They've been brought up by students to Danny Anderson. So an instance that I can tell you this is when the Student Involvement hosted Leadership Palooza, which is a leadership development program that they have for student leaders. We had a breakout session for all the organization presidents with Danny Anderson. We were given an hour where all of us were just thrown into one room and he stood at the front and we were just told to raise our hands if there was anything we wanted to talk about, which I think there could have been a better way to host this workshop, but it's not the point. So one example is what a student brought up regarding their group was the Jewish Student Association. This woman who spoke about how a lot of Jewish students on campus were upset with how faculty treated their observed holidays, their religious observed holidays, and how they might have had to miss classes during those specific days, and how they felt discriminated against because of that. That's such a valid concern, something that needs to be addressed, and I haven't heard anything about that because I'm not involved in the Jewish Student Association. So I really hope that because she was able to discuss it with Danny Anderson there in front of so many people, something was able to happen and there was some follow-up with it, but I don't know. But what was brought up with him by multiple people in this room was diversity issues. People point blank said, can we get more funding for the Diversity and Inclusion Office? Can we get more resources? Why does Ali Roman not have a support staff? And of course he was standing there, he was writing things down, and he's nodding, he's listening to us. And I just want to say, that's just one example of when it's been brought up but nothing has happened. And so please don't try to tell me that we should have tried to say things before or raise our voices and like raise these concerns. They have been raised. They've been told to multiple administrators on multiple occasions. And this is why I keep wanting to go back to that point that Kezia has made, is why now is Trinity deciding to say that Black Lives Matter? Unless you are telling me that you are willing to allocate funding towards this diversity and inclusion office, that you are willing to give it the support and resources that it needs, you do not care about Black lives. You do not care about your students from marginalized communities. So something else that I wanted to talk about is my personal experience with Dr. Sheryl Tynes. I was a junior when I first had my like one-on-one interaction with her, and it was because of a quote that was put out in a Trinitonian article from me, and it was in relation to the Student Advisory Board, which I mentioned before that I was a co-chair of. To give you a little background, the Student Advisory Board was created as a diversity and inclusion program through the Diversity and Inclusion Office, and it was created to help bring representatives from cultural organizations and organizations with diversity chairs or facets, to bring the representatives from all of those places to one table, to one room, once a month, where we, focused on, I think one session was on like mental health and how student leaders need to be taking care of themselves. But we also used the time together to discuss programming that cultural organizations were creating. We use it as a way to share resources and to collaborate and show each other how we have the same goals. We had a lot of big picture ideas that aligned with each other. And so how can we be strategic in the way that we do our work and band together for it to be stronger? And so that was like the preface of like, that's like a broad overview of what the Student Advisory Board was and did. I was quoted in this article saying, "I do want to see things change, and I do think Trinity wants to do better. So I think there needs to be that accountability. Sometimes I don't really feel like diversity is supported by the administration. What are we doing for those students, and what are we doing to make those students feel at home on campus?" When I say those students, I'm talking about students from marginalized communities, from diverse backgrounds. And so that when I ask that question, like, what are we doing for those students, that's also coming from me reflecting on my previous experiences at this school of not feeling like I could call Trinity my home, not feeling like I had a safe space or community, and feeling isolated and alienated because for multiple different reasons. But anyways, this article dropped, and within 30 minutes, I had an email waiting from Dr. Tynes in my inbox, asking me to meet with her to discuss my experiences and my thoughts on diversity. And, I was like, okay, let me be intentional with this meeting. Let me not only just use this as a time to discuss my personal experiences, let me use it as a time to bring up TDC initiatives, to maybe find a way or a plan of action that we can use together to hold the administration accountable. Of course, everything that I came up with TDC prior to the meeting was not addressed in the meeting with Dr. Tynes, and I'll get into why. So the day of the meeting comes, I meet with her. She has to take notes. I say yes. I give my whole spiel on my time as a student leader, my time at Trinity, my work with TDC and the DIO, and from her demeanor, I didn't get the impression that she was actively listening to me, and that she was like impacted by my words. And I was like, okay, well, let's see how this keeps going. And then the conversation turned to us talking about Pell Grant students and Bridge students and students who are low income. And it was not me adding to this conversation. It was her telling me stories about different students and how successful they are post-graduation, and how Trinity's helped these students have access to resources. And in my head, I'm like, yes, that's great. Like, I appreciate what you're doing with students in relation to these different groups of students. But in my head, I was also like, how does this relate back to like what we're talking about in relation to me? It never really went back to addressing my personal experiences. She continued to give me statistics about how students of color who graduate from Trinity have a higher percentage of graduating with a job, have a higher percentage of having like financial stability or like security later on in their life. It was just like statistics along the lines of like how successful you will be post-graduation. In my head, I'm like, that's great. I already knew those things because that's part of the reason I decided to come to Trinity. But I was like, how does this relate to me? This, to me, is you telling me that it doesn't matter what my experience is on this campus. It was her dismissing my lived experience. It was her telling me that they didn't really intend to change anything and that they didn't care to do it because it doesn't matter what you had to go through while you're on this campus because you're going to be successful post-graduation. And for the vice president of student life to tell me that or to have that viewpoint is not okay. It was disrespectful. And while this interaction might seem minor to you and, it caused harm, of course, because it was disheartening to me, and made me really question why I was at this school, it also helped me realize that my peer stories that I had heard over the years were all true. I believed them. It just helped to reinforce that they were correct. And I'm not saying that you need to have your own negative experience with her to believe other stories, but for me, I was like, okay, I really know that they are true. And it makes me wonder, like, we only know the tip of the iceberg with what happened with Stacey Davidson, Maisha Smith, and Allie Roman. Like, what else happened? Something else that actually also came up in this conversation with Dr. Tynes was that my little thing about how I said the administration, I felt like they didn't care about diversity. So she said, students love to loosely throw around the term the administration. What do you mean by that? Who are you trying to hold accountable when you say the administration? And I agreed with her point because it was like, okay, fair, like maybe we should pinpoint specific people we want to hold accountable. And to that question, the person I want to hold accountable is you. I want to hold Dr. Tynes, the Vice President of Student Life, accountable for why marginalized students are being caused harm on this campus. But when she asked me that question during this meeting, I didn't have an answer because I was like, what do you mean? Like, when I say the administration, like, I really just mean you in my head. And so I didn't really, know how to respond to her. But as much as, yes, we should hold specific people accountable and use their names, when we say the administration, or at least when I say the administration, I mean every single person who has a voice in this institution, who can use it to make decisions, who can impact the way that we are being treated and the things that shape our experiences. So that could be anyone from a student involvement employee to a board of trustee, across all different departments and under all the different VPs. And I understand that previously, Trinity, and from what I also have seen, departments and maybe also academic departments and the different business functions like to work in their own silos. They know what's going on with them. But there needs to be, I think, a bigger push towards understanding what is actually happening on this campus. And there needs to be a holistic view that everyone has. And so we need to get rid of this notion of only working in our silo. And there needs to be more cross-functional communication and engagement. And that's a call from me to staff and faculty who have said that they didn't know what was happening prior to watching Kezia's video or prior to seeing what the demands were from TDC. I also want to say that we're not trying to brainwash students. Over 500 students and alumni have signed the petition to ask Dr. Sheryl Tynes to step down. Over 500 students and alumni, that's a lot of people. And so I think there needs to be some digging into why 500 people don't just sign a petition for no reason. And so there needs to be some digging and some reflection as to why this is. And I think this administrator needs to be held accountable for the actions and the harm that she has caused to students. And of course, faculty and staff, because we have seen those stories. So if you haven't already picked up on this from things that I've said previously, I'm just going to reemphasize it. What student leaders believe, at least student leaders who engage in diversity and inclusion work, what we know is that we don't feel properly supported on this campus and through student involvement in the work that we do. When it comes to planning events, there are so many hoops that we have to jump through to make them happen. We constantly have venues taken away from us. I have one story about how the day before a huge Lori event that we had planned, that we had spent months marketing and planning, I was called into the office and told, hey, people higher up in SI in student involvement don't think that you will be able to utilize Lori's space. So we want to move your venue. I didn't even know how to respond, so I just started crying because that event was so dear to me. And I recognized my privilege in being able to do this, but I threatened that student involvement employee, and I said, if you do not give me that venue, I refuse. I will drop out of every single leadership position that I hold, and I refuse to do any further programming at this school. And that is your loss, because I know what I bring to this table. And I felt bad saying this to this person because she was, of course, just the messenger. She went back to the person who had first made this decision, which I think was director of student involvement, and then called me back later and said, you know what, you can keep Lori and do your event. That's just one example of how many times this happens. We have so many students whose events are moved because higher ups need their venue, and it happens maybe the day before. We had one event, it's called Taste of Diversity. It's like the culminating event to our week worth of our Diversity Week programming. And Taste of Diversity is probably one of our biggest events every year. It brings out huge chunks of students, and it's just one of our biggest events that we also spend a lot of money on. So we wanted to do it around the fountain, and we knew that there was, I think, a prospective students day or something. And at the time, there was nothing scheduled at the fountain, but admissions still had it booked. And we even asked permission, like, can we have this area? We were told no. And so we proceeded to have our event in the Coates Esplanade. It was funny because when our event was happening, all of those prospective students happened to be in the Coates Esplanade. All of these families were seeing that one day a year where Trinity is so diverse, and all these students from all these diverse backgrounds are on campus together, eating food, sharing culture, doing crafts or whatever we had planned that day. And I had so many parents come up and speak to me personally, being like, oh my God, like, this looks amazing. I'm so glad that they have exposure to different backgrounds, etc. And at the end of the event, and this event went really well. At the end of this event, I was sitting next to the director of student involvement, and she looked at me and she said, this event went so well. And I was like, yeah. She's like, we should intentionally do it on an admissions day next year. I, of course, was just like, yeah. But for student involvement to make it so hard for us to do events, and then to say that to me, I was a little shook. I will be honest. It just goes to show how they really only care about your events when it helps to improve Trinity's appearance. And that's a narrative and story that's been repeated so many times by so many student leaders before me, and it's something that, if things don't change, will continue to be repeated after me. And it's just something that I want to bring light to and share. So I think I've covered almost everything that I wanted to talk to in this video. It was way longer than I wanted it to be. I also want to say that while I was at Trinity, I was always someone who was very respectful, and I was always someone who was, gung-ho about sharing my experiences, but also trying to shine a light on like the bright places in Trinity that would help to bring diverse students to this school. But I'm done helping bring students to this school when they are being harmed, when they are not being supported, when our Black peers and friends have to face violence from TUPD, from other systems of oppression that are just still being upheld. And as I mentioned before, I also have a call of action to my peers, because it's not just the institution and those in charge, it's also the culture that we hold as a student body. We need to step away from performative allyship. We need to step towards being productive allies. Don't forget, ally is a verb. There are so many ways in which I can list that students have been complicit. You're complicit when you go to board of trustee luncheons and you tell board of trustees that we don't have diversity issues. If that is a narrative that you believe while representing marginalized students on this campus, you need to step down from your position and you need to stop going to these meetings. You're complicit when you let your friends and your sorority sisters and your fraternity brothers say the N-words and don't condemn their actions. You're complicit when you see microaggressions happen against students and you don't say anything. You don't speak up and protect them. You're complicit, and also this is just straight up offensive. When you ask students who have hard names to pronounce to like whitewash their names, to shorten them, to make you comfortable. Learn how to pronounce people's names. You're complicit if you weren't upset or angry at the process and how the 4 Black RAs were treated that led to them being terminated or them resigning. You can have different opinions as to how you feel about them being terminated or them resigning, but the way in which they were treated by the school is disrespectful. You're complicit when you're not upset that TDC and social justice peer educator workshops are being hacked and hateful messages are being spread to these people who put in so much work to help educate our community. You're complicit, and you were complicit when the 50 or 60 of you stood there and watched as a friend was handcuffed and snatched away at an off-campus university-sponsored event. You were complicit by not stepping in to protect Black and brown bodies, and we ended up in group therapy, and while you got to forget about that moment. And these are just different ways in which I believe students are complicit. Faculty and staff are also complicit. Your silence is violence. And so I want to remind everyone that this right now is not just a moment in history where you can post a Black square on your Instagram and, you know, you've done your part. No, you need to keep educating yourself. You need to learn what it truly means to be anti-racist. You need to realize that this is a movement. It will not end unless Black lives truly matter, unless social justice has been achieved. And while this is happening around the world and in this country, it's also happening on this campus. So please educate yourselves, hold yourselves accountable, hold your peers accountable, hold this institution accountable, and let us do our part in making sure that Black students feel safe on this campus, that Black lives actually matter. And again, I'm gonna reiterate this. Trinity University was asked to say Black Lives Matter twice before, and each time they said it was too divisive. So why are you saying it now? What is going to change, and how are you going to uplift and make sure these students are safe on this campus? If you've made it this far, I just want to say thank you so much for watching and for listening to everything that I have had to say. I hope that this video has helped to educate you and that it has helped to shine a light on the different areas of Trinity that still need to be discussed. That includes the Office of Admissions, that includes the power structure that SGA holds, that includes defunding TUPD, if not abolishing them. Those are just 3 examples. There are so many other processes and systems in this institution that need to be deconstructed and looked at. If there's anything that I've said that has upset you or that you don't agree with, please reach out to me. I would love to engage in discussion around things that I've talked about, but I will not tolerate my lived experiences being up for debate. I will not tolerate my peers' lived experiences and stories being up for debate. I will not tolerate us being dismissed and dehumanized. So please, again, as I said before, be kind. And if you do want to contact me, my email is msingh, SINGH1 @trinity.edu. And again, thank you so much for listening to me.